Hey guys, just real quick note before the video starts. I actually had a problem with my camera this week, so you won't actually be able to see me follow through on this video here. The full walkthrough's here. It's just I won't be on camera. Do apologize. Issues getting fixed already, so next week we'll be back up full force. So see you guys then and enjoy this video. Hello everyone and welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed the release of the composition recreation that we did last week for Final Fantasy VII, because today we are going to be doing some walkthrough of it. We're going to be exploring how this track was written out, kind of how it was orchestrated, and we're going to be listening back to it and seeing what they did to make it sound the way it did. If you haven't listened to the recreation yet, I highly recommend going and watching last week's video because it'll help you follow along better in this video. We are going to have a quick listen through of it again here before we hop into it. So just going to get that started for you guys and enjoy. So right off the bat, I have to say this is probably one of my more favorite compositions to come out of this year. I was a huge fan of the original Final Fantasy VII, and I was super stoked when I found out that they were actually doing a recreation, which I haven't had the chance to actually play yet, but the music from it is outstanding. The composers did an amazing job in capturing the mood of the original game in the recreation and improving upon it in various ways, including just generally in quality. So they start off with these really, really high E's. In this beginning section here, the score starts off being in the G major or E minor scale. Considering how this was written out and how the beginning section plays out, it's most likely focused around the E, so it'll be in the E minor. And they start off with these really suspenseful, long string notes. And then they bring in some parts of the melody. And then they bring in the melody. And they mirror it. And then we have the winds and the brass come in, I wouldn't say full force, but in a very, very emotional introduction of the strings and brass. You transition from this from this very, very suspenseful and drawn out section that's focusing around that E harmony. As you can see, we have octaves of E here. And then one of the next long notes that he transitions to out of the melody is the B, so you have a power chord of the E and the B. And then when we transition into more of the full sort of brass and winds over here, you have an F-A minor interval that transitions into this, again, an EGB chord, but instead of an EGB, it's actually a suspended chord with the E and the F and the B, which they then transition into the full sort of EGB chord over here with their E and these shorter G notes and our B up here, but they include the seventh for it. And it really, really gives it that super emotional sort of Final Fantasy vibe, having that seventh in there as we continue forward. And then, once again, we're still focusing so heavily on that E chord, except now instead of having all those high notes, they've transitioned the orchestration down into this lower section. They have just E, G, B. They have an F sharp up here, and you don't have to worry about this. This is drums. Don't ignore this. This is drums. But again, they focus on that heavy E, G, B chord up here, with some dissonance, having that F sharp in there. And then they start to transition over into another key entirely with this sort of transitional chord here after the G. It's got F, A, and C sharp here, as well as a seventh E. And then you have the melody sort of transitioning up top into this section over here, which is in an entirely new scale, really, really bringing together that fantasy vibe. So if any of you have played any of the Final Fantasy VIIs or listened to some of the new music, you've definitely heard this part. This is kind of sort of the main opening theme where the title flashes across the page. You have the big title and logo for the entire game pop up, and it's all floating over the giant city. And it's a really, really heroic melody. underlined by a very, very sort of fantasy-styled chord structure and orchestration. So we have this really, really dissonant. We have E, F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E. Really, really dissonant chord with 7th or 9th, I believe. 7th, F, A, C, and then E. And then you have a 7th in the bass as well, accentuating that. And then you transition into a whole nother scale under a whole nother chord. So then it goes over, again, from this E over here to this F sharp major chord with the 7th E on top. And that transitions over to this minor E scale, which it doesn't stay in for long. It only stays in for this sort of title sequence and opening melody theme that it plays here. And it has this huge inflections of this E major chord spread out across everywhere. You have it repeated up here and down here, as well as all the way down at the bottom with this sort of really, really fast running E line. And it really pushes it forward alongside one of the most majestic melodies I have ever heard in my existence. Now, what's really surprising about this section is the melody is actually really, really down to earth. It's really in the middle of the mix. It's just floating around the C3 to C4 octave of your piano, right? It's really, really down to earth and just really in the center of your harmonic range. And what's really surprising is that there's a whole bunch of stuff right above it, taking up a whole lot of the upper frequency spectrum. This is really surprising because a lot of the orchestrations I've studied so far, the melody is always on top. It's always the highest of the high, as far high as you can get it. But they've actually done something a little different here where they've orchestrated the melody in the very center using those big, powerful, and majestic French horns and putting the flutes and some of the strings up higher. You have a piccolo up here, a violin up here, piccolo, oboes, clarinets, more clarinets, and then finally we hit the brass with the trombones and the French horns. And you have this underlying viola up and down, which helps give it some motion, which you can actually hear. And if I were to take that away, it would really, really ruin the section. They did a really great job of giving this section as much detail and emphasis as it needed. They go from this big E major emphasis and they again skip over sort of your basic triads and they go again into a suspended chord with F, A, and C, except they took out the A, put in this G sharp right here as well as here, and kept it in this running viola line as well. Transitioned it away from sort of your standard triad movements and gave it that very interesting push forward it needs. And then we die down as we move on to the next big piece of music. They just do a very simple transition here, but what I want to point out as well is how they structured the melody in this section as well. So you have this dotted quarter note to eighth note to half note kind of pattern that they play here at the end of the melody, as well as over here when they move over to the sort of second section of it. And they do a great job of making that part of the melody recognizable because they emphasize it twice over here. And then as the section's dying down, they play it 2 more times over here, which really helps emphasize your melody and your theme. And as it's dying down, they also take out all those upper harmonics. They get rid of this running viola line. And they bring down the chords until eventually you just have an E and an A, so your A, C, E minor chord, but it's just the A and the E, and it really takes out all sort of the emotional presence that was there before, because you just have the first and the fifth of the chord, and they give you this big run up with the harp while the melody's climbing down, and then it just sort of dies out. So this next section was where we started getting to more of the action. This next section is the sort of bombing mission music that you get to the very beginning of the game when you're running in with the rest of the characters and you're going into the reactor and doing all this shit. I'm not going to make any spoilers, but it's a great bit of the game, great bit of music as well that they wrote for it. They have this very, very interesting piano run. And I say it's very interesting because it doesn't stay in the key that they transition it into. When they transition to this sort of new section here, they're no longer in that E major key, and they're no longer in that G major or E minor key that they started out with. Now they're in F major. So they've done yet another key change, but this doesn't stay in the key that D minor key occupies. D minor or F sharp has a B flat, which they have right here. But this also has a E flat or D sharp, and it also has this G sharp or A flat, which you can't really tell what it is because there's an A here. There's also a G over here playing right after it. So it's a lot of chromatic movements in this run. They also have these sort of moving snare patterns that help push it forward, and this sort of double bass later goes into cello as well that gives you the power behind this movement, and it's just a great little ostinato pattern that introduces you to the next song. When you have a big pattern like this, it is a great pattern that really helps push your piece forward. However, if you have it playing by itself over a very, very long period of time, as they do here, it can get boring very fast. And they did an amazing job of getting rid of that sort of, it's still going. They added in some high-end movement here, but they didn't repeat the whole pattern. It leaves it on a little bit of suspense as you move forward, and it helps push it forward even more. So they have these really great accents right in the middle of it too that tell you that this section's coming to an end and that we're about to get to something even more intense. I personally love this little run up, this doot that they do here. It really helps push the dissonance forward as well because these notes again are not entirely in that D minor scale. Again, they have that A flat or G sharp here. They have so much dissonances in here as well. F, G sharp, B, D, F, G, B, and more of it down here. It's really a really big hodgepodge of notes, and it really brings that distance. You can hear it, you can feel it as it plays through. And then they bring in again that chromatic movement down. One thing I've discovered very recently by analyzing this as well as just working with my own music is you should never underestimate how effective a chromatic run can be. I'm going to say this as well, don't overuse them, because if you start writing everything chromatically, your music ain't going to sound that good because it's just going to be horror music all the time. But chromatic movements up or down, such as they have here, really push some sections forward, especially when you don't really have any sort of overlying melody or musical theme that you're currently aiming towards. They don't have any sort of overlying melody playing here. They're just kind of push this section forward into the next section and get the music where it needs to be. And these really high string and wind accents here as well really help as well as we move into the next section. Such a smooth transition into what I would say would be the main melody of this piece. You go out of these big piano and string runs with these big accents, and you go to this DFA chord with this, ignore that, that's a snare. And you go into this very less powerful, kind of tones it down a little bit, but it has the music rising up again as we go into this new section. So it dips down and it transitions into this DFA chord here, and then it transitions into another suspended chord. They really loved suspended chords in this one with a C, E, G, but instead of the E, they took out the E, put the D in. And then I have these 8-note triplet patterns that are playing in the winds as we move into the next section. All right, now we get into the good shit. We've transitioned into sort of a main section with our main melody, and you can really notice it because they've got a lot more movement and a lot more runs happening to accompany this melody here. So that's kind of a little teaser of what's going to happen later on. They're sort of introducing the main melody before going in full force with everything they need to get that piece going. They're still keeping it in suspense because they've got a lot of pedaling happening. As you can see, this G note is happening throughout everything. It doesn't move, it doesn't shift, it doesn't go away. They're kind of holding off on the C, E, G sort of C major sort of key and just keeping everything there, but they're introducing some sevenths and ninths to keep it interesting and keep that fantasy feel going. Sorry, ignore these blue notes. Those are bass drums. But on top of that C, E, G, they have this B flat that comes back and plays a lot. As you can see, it's up on top, it's up in the middle. It's down here a lot in the woodwinds and the strings. And then you have the main brass melody, which again, they haven't gotten high really with it yet. They haven't gotten up into the upper octaves. They're still kind of keeping it toned down because they're reserving some power and some interest for the future, which I highly recommend doing with your own pieces, because if you can keep interest while keeping your main power for like the very end, that's a very, very useful thing that you can do, because then it's still interesting when it hits the very, very end of your song where you do like the final climax. You haven't introduced a lot of the power yet, and now you're introducing it, which they do with this later on. So now they bring back that really, really fun piano run. I love that little piano run. It really hits me home for some reason. I really enjoy it. And they bring back, I'm not going to say chromatic harmony, because that's not really what it is. They're just putting out this descending line in the high strings with the two top violins, and it helps transition it into the next section. Again, they're sort of trying to write something in. Well, I can't really say what they're doing because I didn't write this piece. But in my opinion, what it's doing is transitioning from this section over here into this section and this section over here, because they're introducing something that they already had in before and they know works very, very well and has that emotional feel, and they're bringing it down. There are a lot of composers out there who would refer to this as something similar to No Man's Land. It doesn't have any sort of melodic theme to it yet. There's a lot of emotions that are being presented here and a lot of patterns and movement, but it's not really any sort of themes that are being played, right? You have this descending line, which has this entire section has this underlying pattern here, which starts in the piano, and then they transition it into a different style run in the cellos, and you transition into this DFA, ACE, DFA, EGB. There's just a lot of sort of chord movements happening that help push it forward as we're sort of transitioning over here again into sort of a really, really large section. I won't call it a breakdown, but it's kind of like a breakdown. So they have this top line that starts here, goes down, goes up, and then goes down. Something that is really, really important for your pieces to help keep interest is making sure the movement of your different sections is varied. You don't want everything climbing at once or everything going down at once. If you want to keep your interest over a longer period of time, you kind of want each voice to have its own voice. So what they've done here is while this goes up, this goes down, this goes down, this goes down, but this goes down, this goes up. So they're changing it up a little bit. They're helping keep that orchestration interesting by varying what's going up and what's going down and what's staying the same. So it's a very, very interesting section. And then over here, it's just sort of more runs and more transitioning and more bringing the energy back. As you could hear, the brass was rising up, the strings were rising up. The run starts off really, really low, but they add in more octaves and more instruments as it gets closer to this section over here. And they introduce this really powerful AE power chord that helps push this section forward. Really, really great orchestration as they flesh these runs out too. Now, another interesting thing to point out as they move into this new section over here is they transition from that power chord of AE down into that home chord of D minor. What's very interesting is ACE is the fifth of DFA, our home chord. So essentially what they're doing is they're just taking it and rising everything up to the fifth before bringing it back down to home base for the power that they need. It doesn't sound the same on a keyboard, but the movement is generally similar. It transitions into what I'm going to call one of the main themes, because this sort of dun 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 dun, that rhythm is very, very present in this piece. It's sort of one of the more memorable parts. It's certainly recognizable, and it's very, very interesting when you break it down, because they're just doing these triplet patterns, and they're doing chords in with them. They're not even doing like a melody piece. It's chordal movement. It goes DFA, DFA, CEG, BDF, but they're not staying in key again. There's a lot of chromatic movements going on. There's chromatic dissension here and some chromatic dissension here, which really brings out that descending feeling again, or that powerful feeling in the case of how they orchestrated here with the brass. And it doesn't sound out of key. It is, but it doesn't because of how it's written out. It's all in the center here. They don't have a lot of overlying sort of melodies that they're trying to keep in the key, and they're rooting it all with these repeating D notes to keep everything centered around that D note. And they just build it out more as it goes. Over here, they still have that sort of pattern playing, but now they've filled up the high end with some woodwinds, and they're octaving it out, introducing more and more octaves, and then a big riser with the winds in the harp and some of the strings, which eventually has this same run that we had over before in the cello, down now instead of up. So they had that run, and they were introducing octaves with it up and up and up, and now they're introducing it at the top and bringing it down and down and down until they come over here. Where they once again introduce a really, really memorable middle brass line, which is playing something I would consider to be your sort of main melody, again, of this new part of the piece. So this section, I'm going to say it's one of my favorite sections, but I probably already said that, or I'm going to say it again, because what's really, really interesting about this section is they introduce this sort of melody with the brass, with the French horns, and then they have this sort of transitional section inside this big melody section where the melody actually transitions over to being played in the flutes, all while keeping this really run-heavy rhythm going on. This piece is just littered with flute and string runs, and I absolutely love it. So it really keeps the interest going because they're introducing it, taking it away, introducing it again as something else, and then bringing back the original. And they rise it up at the end as well to emphasize that, you know, this little bit's over and end. And then they do this sort of, again, really memorable section of the song where it's in your woodwinds and it's just descending. It has these chords descending as well. All that, and they come back again and reintroduce that dun 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 heavy rhythm. You think would be orchestrated up bigger considering how large it sounds, but no, everything is just clumped in the middle here. They introduce it again. This is the same as over here. It's almost exactly the same. It's almost like they copy pasted it, but they have this huge section in the middle that has sort of another melodic movement in it. A lot of different style runs, different harmony completely. Even if you just look at the bass notes between the two, this section is focused around that D note. It's focused around that D harmony, whereas everything else up until they reintroduced it again over here is focused around that sort of A harmony. They're just keeping that A in the bass and really emphasizing it, kind of centering everything around that A chord while keeping everything in that D minor scale. So this section is basically an exact copy-paste of the section before, but now sounds different because we're coming from a different section. We're moving to a different section afterwards than anything we've heard around it before. This section is nowhere near similar to this section, which gives that heavy interest as we transition again into this dun 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 part of the song, right? And then we reach the end in a beautiful climax to the song. So they have this sort of main rhythm heavy section that they're sort of ending off sort of their main melody or themes to. And then they have this very interesting transitional section here where it's got a lot of those eighth note triplet patterns and it's just a lot of sort of rhythm, right? And they have these, again, chromatic dissensions that they love using in this piece alongside their runs, which are absolutely everywhere. It really helps, again, drive this section forward because they're using a different notes for their chromatic dissension than before. And they're also using a different harmony than some of their other chromatic dissensions. They're back again focused on that A. They went from that sort of D harmony focus, and now they're back to their A focus. And then they do these really, really big chords with a lot more chromatic dissension, so much over the entire octave of the song. So they're descending, 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 descending. And then at the very end, you can hear it. They have this trumpet and this piccolo, along with a violin and a viola, ascending up as everything's going down. And that's another section where you could say they were mirroring the movement of their piece, where while one part's descending, the others are going up, and that helps building your interest. And it actually serves as a second piece because they're trying to build it up a little bit again before they take out everything away here. This entire section up here is empty, and everything's down here again as they build up again for that final rundown to that big impact, and then the song's done. There's so much going on in this section that I won't be able to fully explain it, just because it's all like there's just so many intricacies in the runs. There's so many dissonances in the runs. It's absolutely nuts. Like, I don't know how they did it. But essentially what's happening is they brought everything back down, but they have this DFA here, and then it goes up to EGB, GBD, DFA. It's a lot of chordal movement as they're moving around. And then they bring everything down. It's essentially a giant rundown to finish everything off on their home note, the D note. So I hope you guys enjoyed this sort of general walkthrough of the piece. I'm going to be going into sort of more detail on sort of how the individual sections function, as we did with our last composition walkthrough. Explore some of the percussion, the piano, and the woodwinds and the strings and the brass, kind of all on their own terms, and figure out sort of what their purposes in this piece are outside of the general harmony and the melody and how the piece progresses, which was sort of today's focus. So I hope you guys found this informative. I highly emphasize this next part. Download the MIDI below for this. I've had it exported and it's downloadable for you below. Download it and bring it into your DAW and study it on your own, because pieces like these, once they're brought into your DAW, make a very great educational resource. You can study them, you can learn how to write off of them, you can learn stuff about this style, you can learn stuff about general orchestration, you can learn stuff on how to write better melodies, better harmony, stuff like that. So download it below, give a like and a sub. It always helps. It really boosts my serotonin levels, which is a great thing for me. And I will see you guys in next week's video. So enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.